Almighty God, we thank you for your patience and your mercy with us, as we can be slow and dull of hearing, and the time that you've given us to repeat through these histories, through these studies that you have given us, that we can come to rightly understand what it is that you've been trying to teach us all along. May these reviews open our eyes greater than ever before, and that we find ourselves walking together with you in perfect harmony, in perfect unity, understanding equality, and prepared for the work that you've called us for. May you bless us as we pick up where Christine left off, and understanding that you are not male. May we understand that today. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So if Lucifer looked at Michael, right? Looks at Michael and compares and sees the differences, and is it safe to say missed that they are the same?
Say that again.
If Lucifer looked at the differences, did he miss that they are the same?
Yeah.
Okay, so he looks at the differences instead of the similarities.
Yeah.
So if we today, as men and women, look at the differences when we are actually the same, what happened to Lucifer?
He separated himself and he became prideful.
He had others looking at the differences as well,
Right.
focused on the differences.
We need to
Instead of-
focus on the
Huh?
So we need to focus on the similarities.
That were the same,
Yeah.
that were the same. Okay, so I'm gonna try to, you guys have to tell me if you can, I know I need to move it, I can see that. But I always pull it up so close that I don't mind being cut off myself, but I don't know if that's the way it's supposed to be. You can see the whole board now, right? Can you read it okay, or do I need to pull it closer?
To me, the lettering down at the bottom, I can't read those words.
Okay. We're gonna do that later. Anyways. I actually didn't intend for that to be for us, but I decided to leave it. And
So
then
put it just a tad closer and then move your monitor up.
okay. Better? And I'll move it up. Is that better?
It's better.
Okay.
I feel like I'm at the eye doctor.
For what?
The eye doctor. D.
I'll be going to see the eye doctor soon. And I hope that it sharpens things up quite a bit.
So Elaine, I have a question.
Yeah.
So we're comparing and contrast. Is that what we're doing? Comparing, are we saying they're same and then contrast is difference?
Well, actually, from what she was going through in that previous study, what we actually saw, it seems like, is that Lucifer was contrasting, right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
So I don't know how to answer that, but because that's what I was kind of thinking, because what Lucifer was doing was he was contrasting. And we have to do that in parallel methodology, compare and contrast. That's how we understand things. But it's just interesting. I don't have the answer because I was thinking about that he's, I don't know if that's what you're asking, but because what Lucifer was doing was contrasting. Maybe it was because he was well, yeah, because he was contrasting but not comparing. He wasn't doing both. That's probably the right thing to say that. I don't know if that was your question, Gloria.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so, yeah, when we compare and contrast, are we telling our differences or are we,
When we
what are we
compare,
doing?
when we
Yeah.
compare the similarities. When we contrast, we're looking at the differences. What is different? What is contrast? Compare is to see the things that are alike. And contrast is to see the things that are not alike.
Okay, thank you.
Somebody correct me if I said that wrong, but I think that would be. Okay, so this study picks up where Christine left off. And it picks up where Christine left off, and the board work is basically the same. So I have it up here already, since it stays the same basically with the Eden to Eden line, and going through the flood and Moses, ancient Israel, modern Israel. And then she had the other line here that showed the war in heaven with a male God, the sun, which is male, Lucifer, which is male, and the angels are male, this model. Here, then you have sin come in, inequality comes in, and then you have Noah, and we'll go through that a little bit more as we go through it. So each of the camp meetings we know pick up where, and it's a continuous thing, even though sometimes things seem kind of disconnected. So we're actually reviewing the Brazil camp meeting now, right? What was the camp meeting before? Anybody remember?
Was it the German International Camp meeting?
Yeah, not international, but yes, the German camp meeting.
Okay.
And we just got through with these reviews, so it might be fresh in our minds. What were they doing? What were they reviewing and studying in that camp meeting?
In God we trust.
Yes, a little more specific though. Yes.
Repeat that?
What was, I guess I would say, what was used in that study?
Oh, repeat the answer, please.
How the Constitution became Christian, the
That's-
article
yeah.
by
Yes,
Jared Goff.
that's it. So in Germany, she went through how the Constitution became Christian. And what did we learn from that article?
That it took 3 histories. First, they wanted to amend the Constitution, and when it came to our time, or 1979, they just interpreted the way they wanted.
Right. So there was 3 histories where Protestantism, I don't know the right way to say it. Let me back up here. In those 3 histories, there was a pattern. And you semi-described it. What was the pattern that was in those 3 histories?
Is it a threat? They were mobilized by a group of threat.
There was a threat. So you saw the 3 histories, and there was a pattern in there, and that was what they would see is they would see themselves a certain way and others that are not like them. Okay, so the word that she brings into this, a group of people believe that they are the American prototype. And the definition she gave for prototype, an original or a model after which anything else formed has to match that original pattern. So in those 3 histories, there's the Americans sees themselves as this prototype, the white Christian American sees themselves as the prototype. So anyone who doesn't fit the prototype is a threat, as Gloria said. So they perceive a threat. So you make that something that's the original, and everything following it has to be cast into the mold of that original. So, and then she gave another word. Does anybody remember the other word that she gave him for prototype? She went into the word epitome, which means to the perfect example. So she looked the epitome of elegance. It was the perfect example of elegance. So a Trump supporter would see white Christian America as a true essence of an American, that white Christian Americans became the prototypes of what it meant to be an American or a US citizen. They would look at themselves as the epitome of the United States citizen. So whether you were Black, Latin, or Muslim woman, you're not the prototype, right? So if you're not the prototype, are you entitled to equal say or vote or equality?
No.
No. So the USA has to be controlled by the prototype. So they see the threat come in. So the United States starts no longer if the United States starts casting itself, no longer casting itself as the model of the prototype, then they have grave fears for the direction it will head. Some will think that it might go into socialism, or you're going to have Sharia law, different things like that come in, racial stereotypes associated with not anyone that is the prototype. Immortality will abound, and the judgment of God will come down. So the prototype has to hold onto power, and they do that by modeling themselves as the epitome, the perfect example. So in each of those three histories, a threat arises, right? And what do they have to do when the threat arises? What do they have to do?
Mobilize.
They do mobilize, but you have all these people in the nation, and this threat arises. What are you going to do with all these people? How are you going to handle that?
In the 1840s to 1850s, or 1850 to 1860s, they saw the Catholic as a threat. So they have to amend the Constitution. For the Jews and the Sabbath Adventists, they have to instill the Sunday law. And I think also for the free thinkers.
Yes, yes. And to keep it really basic and really simple, because all that's true, is that they have to convince the people that there's a threat, that there's this fear and this threat. So they have to convince the people, and that's what Donald Trump is doing as president, that he used fear, and fear that the prototypical epitome of the United States citizen was being lost, and he was their savior. So, and that fear has not gone. And we see that today. So, and we continue to see it. It's just interesting how in Vespers class, number 8 that we listened to, tracing those steps all the way back to 9/11. Okay, so in the last presentation, she discussed gender. That's what Christine just did. She talks about socially conservative Adventists have more fear in them than they actually probably realize. People are afraid of homosexuals, afraid of if you bring them into their home, that it might rub off on them, or that they might contaminate their home, many different things. So but much of what we face with racism, sexism, and homophobia in this movement is the same fear, that there's a threat, this same fear. And then she's talking about what she hears from members of the movement. What happens if I give my wife equal rights and she feels emboldened to oppress me? It's fear-driven. It's Trump saying, if you let in all those refugees, they're going to rise up and oppress you, white Christian Americans, so keep your foot on their necks. And if you don't fear them, if they don't fear you, you will fear them. So I think we talked about this the other night. If all these refugees come in and they're going to rise up, we were actually talking about the Egyptian history as well, right? That Pharaoh was afraid that the Israelites would outnumber them and go join the enemies and take down Pharaoh, take down the king. So, and this was back in, I think this was January of 2021. I think it's January 2021, might be February. I think it's February, I guess. So she's talking about the previous 18 months, seeing, and Christine touched on this, seeing that there is more resistance than there is acceptance in the movement to the message of equality. And why is that? Why is there resistance in the movement to the message of equality? What's the cause?
Our misunderstanding of heaven,
A misunderstanding
gender.
of gender, holding on to the male model, this of heaven, holding on to that. Okay, so it's the exact same problem faced with the issue of nationalism, which is that document, because the document was about nationalism with us when it comes to gender. So because men and women in this movement hold to the model, this model here, that there was war in heaven, and it was between two males, and then some other male, and then another male, and they all chose sides. And then that spilled out onto Adam. So with that model in mind, this model here in mind, what did God create for Adam?
A helper. Eve.
Counterpart.
With this model in mind, what did he create? And that was interesting because it did talk about this in a different way in your study, Christine. With this model in mind, what was Eve?
A slave.
What was that?
A slave.
A slave. So God creates a servant to be his help. Right? And then they have sons. But what are their daughters' names?
They have no names.
They have no names. And then you have Noah. Down to Noah. 4 men. They all have wives. As far as we know from the Bible, they all have wives. What are their names?
They have no names.
They have no names. And then Christine covered this as well. Patriarchs and prophets is what?
Men.
Story of men. And then you have the 10 Commandments, which is given by who?
Men.
Men. And given to who?
Men.
Men. Then you have prophets and kings. Men. You have Desire of Ages, where you have John and Jesus and the 12 disciples, and then you also do have Paul. You have the Protestant Reformation. What do Adventists think of the Protestant Reformation?
It's all about men.
Yeah, it is all about men. I don't know if they think of it that way, but yeah, they do. It is all about men. But what was our view of the Protestant Reformation? It was all great and good, right?
Yeah.
It was all great and good. And it's a glorified picture of the Protestant Reformation. And we looked also more intensely at John Knox. The Elder Test brought us through that history and showed us the origin of the Covenanters, what they stood for, tracing it all the way back to John Knox. And then what do we know about the Reformation? When it comes to women, what do we know? You learned the 1260. What's your picture of women in the 1260? I don't know if that's the right way to answer that question.
Although they're all witches.
Yeah, that's there too. That's there too. So who were they? Who was the Protestant Reformation? And think about Revelation chapter, is it chapter 3? The 5th church. Who were they fighting against?
You mean Thyatira? Jezebel?
What'd you say?
Thyatira or Jezebel?
Jezebel. They were fighting that wicked Jezebel. And also in that history, you have bloodthirsty queens, right? So the men are the good guys. What I got out of that, the men are the good guys. Okay, then you come to this history here, and Christine also touched on that. This is the alpha of modern Israel. You have Miller and Snow, men and men. Then you do have Ellen White, but what is she called?
The lesser light.
Lesser light.
a lesser light. She can't even be called a prophet. She's a lesser light. And then today, so then with all of that, why is equality so hard to understand? And she talks about in that with us, the message of equality comes in 2019. She's not referring to FFA who left. She's talking to the people in the movement at that time and those that won't be here tomorrow is how she worded it. Those that are with us but won't be here tomorrow. And she started to wonder, why is it so hard? So why is it so hard? We've traced this whole history. Why is equality so hard?
Because of our misconception of heaven and gender.
Because of the model. We've got that male model stuck in us. The Father, the Son, Lucifer, and the angels. Why? Who do they think these are? I might have asked that wrong. Who do the people in the movement think that the men in the movement think that they are?
The prototype.
The prototype. They're the prototype or the epitome of heaven. Right? What does the prototype represent? You know, it's male. This is the wrong prototype. It's male. What does it represent?
The original.
Say that again.
The original or the ideal, is it?
Not the answer that I'm looking for. What, if you take Lucifer out of here, what do the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit represent? They're male.
You mean Trinity?
Power,
Power. Who said, somebody said power.
Jackie said it.
They represent power and authority, right?
Yes,
So the men here have this model in their mind, and this model is all male, and it represents power and authority. So if you're the prototype, what are you? You're male, and you have the power and authority, right? So they still believe in a masculine God. And here's another statement she mentions about people in the movement. She says, I hear something like this. I accepted equality. I've done a good job. I allow my wife some freedoms. Aren't I good? What's wrong with that sentence?
You can't allow you say you allow, that word is oxymoron to freedom.
Right, right. I've given her some freedom, some rights out of the goodness of my heart. She says, I'm not being sarcastic. She's actually quoting somebody that has actually said this to her. That they've allowed her some freedoms out of the goodness of their heart. And my response is, you don't get to give anyone something out of the goodness of your heart that they already have. Freedom is theirs. It is all of ours to have. It can't be given to you. It's yours. So did you allow her rights, or did she already have them while you were oppressing her? My request is that you give her nothing and you get out of the way. But the reason that he has that mindset is because he is the prototype, right? A white US citizen today can say, I'm nice, and out of the goodness of my heart, I'll give rights to a Black American. You can't give what is already theirs. She says that our response and our vision should be so clear on that subject. It's not that the white citizen is giving the Black citizen anything that didn't already belong to them, that they didn't already own.
I like that answer, just to get out of the way,
Get out of the way.
giving anything, just get out of the way,
Yes. Yes. So there's the problems in the document, how the Constitution became Christian, which was based on nationalism, are the same problems that we have here with sexism in the movement. And it's necessary to understand the gender of God because that prototype is in our subconscious, whether we are aware of it or not, conscious or subconscious, unconscious of it. That prototype of this male God that's power and authority is in us. And what do we call this male patriarchal authority? That view, what studies have talked about what that view is of a masculine God,
Apis bull.
the Apis bull, a God with a gendered brain. So we believe in a gendered brain because we think God has a gendered brain. We might be unwilling to say that God has male body parts, but we do still see God as having a gendered brain. And because we place all male there, and the whole Bible is written by males to males, and very little is spoken of women. So if you read that whole history, 66 books written by men to a male audience, male-oriented stories from a male perspective, develop the idea that God has a gendered brain. It all comes down to what type of model you're going to follow, how you're going to read. And this sentence that she says here next ties into more what she says later, but it really made me stop and think about this as well. She said, many women struggle with this more than are willing to admit. So many pages of inspiration and so little given to the subject of domestic abuse, comparatively little addressing to the stories, the needs, the subjects of women, which many women, more than we might be aware, have lost their faith on that thought. And she gives a story later that made me really think about that. So the women are not focused on. There's nothing being talked about abuse against the women. So it is a fair thought to have that thought in your mind based on this book being written the way that it is. So the prototypically male heaven, it created a prototypically perfect Adam. And that in that model, the white male Christian American citizen is the men of this movement. And out of the goodness of their hearts, they may allow freedom and equality, but there is little hope of success unless they break down the idea of the prototype. They have to break down that model and that take down the male model. Otherwise, there is little chance of success. So what should the model look like? If we were to tell a story, what should it say?
That women and men are equal,
The same.
the same.
So here's how she told it. A non-gendered heaven, non-gendered heaven fell into sin The Father, Son, and Lucifer, we know them through the Bible as Father, Son, and Lucifer, the Holy Spirit, do not have gendered brains. What they did have is the ability to create. And they wish to create a planet. She put Lucifer in here as this creating, but I think she was just referencing the four, but she's not talking about them as the four here. So they wanted, let's see, the ability to create, and they wish to create a planet and a fellowship of people that shared that desire to create. They wanted them to form partnerships to realize how much they needed each other. So they created Adam first. He realized he was not complete. And by the way, if it's not complete, then it can't be the prototype. So we know that from Elder Parmenter's studies that he pointed out, Adam naming the animals was for a reason. What was that reason?
So Adam could see his lack,
Yeah.
his need for a companion.
And he also was able to then understand God as well.
Yeah.
So Adam then realized that he's not complete. And if something's not complete, it can't be the prototype because you cannot cast a model of something that's not complete. So they create Adam and Eve together. So Adam and Eve together are the prototype. Do I have that right? Yeah. Adam and Eve together are the prototype. We don't know the language they spoke. We don't know their skin color or the hair type, the curl of their hair. Variation comes, none of those characteristics are prototypical. And man and woman together create because humanity is designed to create. So Adam and Eve are one. They're the prototype. So then she goes on to talk about creation. And I don't know if I'll write these up here because I don't want to take all this down, but we'll go through this, what she says, and you can shout out the answers about creation. Because creation is the characteristic of God himself that he wants to implant in humanity. What does God love to create? And you guys can shout them out.
Order?
See that?
I think order, but I don't think that's the right answer.
Doesn't do
Well, I
that.
was gonna say order also, and with that, beauty.
They're what?
I was also gonna say order, but with order, beauty.
With order, beauty. I guess I'll say the same thing she said. I didn't write it down in here, so I have to think it through. But being more specific, actual, literal, what did he create?
Well, he created people.
He created people. What else?
Nature,
Nature. Which was
flowers, trees.
Yes.
Animals, birds.
flowers, animals, stars, light, rivers. These are some of the answers that they all presented. Showing that they were all insights to things that people find beautiful. Beauty, as Phil put it, beauty. So what did God create? What did God design for humanity to create? And then she makes a point. Not maybe our prophetic minds as we continue to grow a little bit, but as a conservative Christian, what did God create? What did God design for humanity to create? Babies.
Yeah, like Mary said, babies.
Babies. God created so you have this big list of things, the rocks, the minerals, right? The people, the flowers, the animals, the colors, the stars, the light, all these things, and he's putting together the structures of heaven and earth. And he designs for humanity to create babies. What's wrong with that picture? How many days did God spend creating?
6.
6, what you said?
Yeah.
6.
How many days did he spend creating humanity?
1.
So were we designed to just create babies?
No, not just to create babies, no.
Not just to create babies. God created much more than people. There's an imbalance. God is an artist and loves to create. He loves to create living and unliving things. We gave some examples of that. Like a cat, living, or a mineral, or a tree and a rainbow. And his acts of creation are varied, and it's not limited to the living. And the conservative mindset is what? Babies.
Baby's right.
It's babies. And she calls that a tragic limitation. So a woman decides she'll never have children. Instead, she's going to go to university, study to be an architect. And all the conservative people around her say, you're failing as a woman. You're failing God. Why would they say that?
She's not creating babies.
Because she's not creating babies. She's already a creator, and it's sexist and very prevalent mindset. But God spent 6 days in creation, in doing what God felt fundamentally loves to do, and only 1 day in creating people. Okay, so what was he doing in those other 5 days? And I kind of referenced it already. What was he doing those other 5 days?
Drawing.
What?
Drawing
Huh?
and splashing color all over the place. Making things beautiful.
He was. He did the stars, the sun, moon, stars, the light, right?
Yeah.
The animals. So he was designing the non-living fundamental structures of heaven and earth. So if a woman has a desire to study and practice architecture, and she's made in the image of God, is she fulfilling her God-given desire to create?
Yeah. Yes,
Absolutely.
definitely.
So we're surrounded with beautiful examples of the love of God has for creation. And we just have this tiny little pinprick idea of what humanity is meant. So all of this beauty and all that God created, and then us just believing that we're here only to create babies. And we were designed to create much more. So where did technology come from? The desire to explore. Art, music, where did they all come from?
By people creating.
People created, right? So though things are polluted by sin, we know that. Things are polluted by sin, it's still creating, right?
Right.
And it's interesting because with your study and then what this one goes on to say is, yes, it's very warped. It is very warped, but it's still exercising that creative aspect that God has put into us. So Zoom as well. Where did Zoom come from?
Created.
It was created. So then she talked about Daniel, because this was the Brazil camp meeting, where Daniel did a couple of presentations as well. Daniel creates a lot of videos. He's creating, right? She talked about Elder Gabriel, his art and drawing, he's creating. And when we're creating, we're creating, I don't know how to ask this, what are we being or what are we doing? God created, he designed in us to create. So when we're creating, what are we doing?
We're being like God.
We're being like God. Acting in the image of God. So women, though, suffer the most from this limitation. They want to be kept into Eden, into the garden, doing their gardening, and sometimes even cooking, right? Cooking can be creation, right? Okay. So God had fun creating light and matter, minerals, architecture, and heaven and earth. And it's our work perspective that holds us back. So if a woman wants to spend her life painting gardens, painting scenes, and never has children, even though this earth has more people than it can manage, conservative Christianity does not see her as exhibiting the characteristics of creation that God planted in her. They see her as failing in much of her life. There is this focus on marriage and children, and instead, we should encourage and embrace each other in the aspects of creation. So however warped by sin, people had a drive to create, which came from God. So we'll try to do this part. I'm not real good here. I think you can see over this little spot. But just another piece that she mentioned, that if you were to have, and maybe somebody will help me with this. You've got the earth, you've got Eve up here. And then you've got great children, descendants, etc. here, where they meant to communicate. Where they meant to communicate. So we have in our own work way been fulfilling what God designed for us to do, even with Zoom. So I don't know if what she meant by that, but what I was kind of thinking by us being able to go back and study and understand, we can have a better understanding here. Maybe somebody can better explain it if I have it wrong. But what we are doing is around the world, we're linked together through Zoom, which is created by humanity. So people think that they'll go to heaven, play a harp, and just get to visit, study and visit people, and then there's nothing else left to do in eternity. She does say that she thinks that God's more varied than that, but doesn't try to go beyond what God has actually opened up. But when I say that God does, when I say what does God create? Our answers were a big list. And what does humanity create? All we had to say was babies, right?
So Mary asked a question. What did Elder Parmenter in his last presentation mean when he said we are creating prophecy?
I don't know that that's something I can go into here and now. Was that his last presentation? Has it been that long? Because that was a long time ago that he said that.
It's been a while since he presented.
Huh?
It's been a while since he presented.
Yeah. Creating prophecy. I think we are living, that's what I would have said. We are living prophecy out. So we are a living testimony in making it happen.
Yeah.
Um,
Good answer.
so we're literally actors in the theater. We have all this. Well, look at it this way. Look at the issues that are going on with the elections and Trump and all these other things. They don't have the prophetic understanding, but are they not living prophecy?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
They're living prophecy.
We're also witnessing all that.
Yes. We're witnessing it from the prophetic lens.
Right.
Yeah. So, and then she mentioned the golden cards. If anybody's familiar with the golden cards in heaven, that the angels, Ellen White writes about the angels having those golden cards that they go with swipe cards that bring them in and bring them out. She says, with all this warped view of things, she said it affects how we look at and judge other people, especially people who do not marry and do not have children, especially people who study, and especially women. I would say that even if the most in the most warped fields of creation, like ugly books of fiction, people are trying to do what was implanted in them at their own creation. So it was more than babies that Adam and Eve and their descendants were designed to create.
Elaine,
Yes,
I find it interesting, when we try to limit, what mankind's creative ability is. And I just want to just put this in here. I think I mentioned it maybe before, sometime long ago. But if you look at the book Education, the very last chapter is called The School of the Hereafter, and it's only 9 pages long. And it goes into the fact that no matter what we decide to pursue or to build or to learn, that no matter what we accomplish, there's always going to be more to accomplish, because we're standing in eternity. And I think it's in Isaiah where it talks about on the new earth, that we will build homes and inhabit them. And I mean, we're going to be creating and doing all kinds of things for eternity. This was just the start of everything, and like you said, not only is good created, but evil has been being created too. The creation that man has been doing, some of it isn't good, but
and it is created.
and it's just a thought.
So she mentions too this, that I'm trying to think how she said it. So when the earth is filled or replenished, many people think the ability to have children would have stopped. If you're only created to create babies. So once the earth is replenished, that the ability to have children would be stopped, because even without sin, it would have filled. Even without sin, the earth would have been filled. And then God would have just turned off that desire to create. And again, there are things we don't know. All I wish to do is broaden our view of what it means to create. So he wouldn't shut off to create. And I think that goes with what Bob was just conveying, that you're still going to go on and create. So anyway, so we began this camp meeting with 2 seemingly unrelated subjects. First of all, the identities of Lucifer and Christ, and that's what Christine went through. We saw that Lucifer was comparing and contrasting. He was contrasting and not comparing. He was seeing the differences and not the similarities. And the other subject that we looked at was the concept of restoration, the Eden to Eden line. So then she goes on to, maybe somebody remembers the quote. I don't remember I don't remember where to find the quote, but she was referring to the one of the studies that she did where she talked about child abuse. And I remember it was a man who was sexually abusing, molesting a child. Elder Tess makes the point that she does not agree with what Ellen White says, Ellen White's counsel, and that to disagree with Ellen White today, Elder Tess or us, to disagree with Ellen White would be seen as blasphemous. So what God is doing is taking ancient Israel out of paganism. Well, he was taking ancient Israel out of paganism. And the story that we see of the women accused of adultery, we're going to look at. And I may read more of this just to not miss any of the points. So back at the beginning of ancient Israel, Matthias taught, I hope I said his name right, Matthias, taught us about pagan cultures at that time. A woman in ancient culture who committed adultery, if it was proven, if it was known that she had committed adultery, she was supposed to die. If it wasn't known or not proven, she'd have to go to the priest and then throw herself into the river. And if she drowned, then she was guilty. And if she lived, she was innocent. So remember, God is taking Israel out of paganism. So we have the Bible to tell us God has taken people out of paganism in the beginning of ancient Israel. And he says to them, if a woman is proven to have committed adultery, she must die. If it's not proven, she must be taken to the priest. So they're in the desert, not where they were in the other story, they're in the desert, so there are no rivers. So he has them take water with the dust from the temple floor, mix it up and drink it, the woman, drink it. And if she remained well, then she was innocent. And if she became extremely ill, Tess said probably miscarried, that she was considered guilty. So why this test? Why this drinking test? Any thoughts? We've kind of actually been touching on it through the day. So what God has done is given them a version of what is already happening in paganism. And this is the instruction of God. God gave them the instruction to do this to women. This was, and it was given to them by their prophet, Moses. So then you come to the time of Christ. And the Pharisees find a woman committing adultery, and it's proven that she committed adultery, even though we know she was set up. That wouldn't have gone past the Mosaic law that she was set up. She still committed the sin. She's dragged at the feet of Christ, and the Pharisees say, don't you know what the prophet wrote about how to treat someone? And what is Jesus' answer? Anybody remember?
He who is guilty cast a stone first.
Right.
Yeah.
John 8:7. He that is without sin among you, you were close. He that is without sin among you, cast the first stone. I think you said it but reversed. Might have heard you wrong.
Yeah, sorry.
He that is without sin among you, cast the first stone. So if there was one of those men there without sin, would they have been allowed to cast a stone? Or we to go around stoning people for sin? I'll read it from here. So I'm going to suggest that was just an excuse. If there was one of those men without sin, would they have been allowed to cast the stone? Anybody? No, no, okay.
No.
To say why? How do we know that? How do we know that? That they would not be allowed to cast a stone?
It was
Because
because of,
Jesus was the only one that was without
Yes.
sin, and he didn't cast a stone.
He didn't
yeah,
cast.
that's what I was gonna say.
So he had no sin, therefore isn't he required by his own words to cast the first stone in fulfilling the Mosaic law. So this isn't about those men having sin. It isn't they were just not worthy to stone her, because it was about them not being worthy. There was if it was about them not being worthy, there was someone there who was worthy, and that was Christ. And he didn't cast a stone. So he makes 2 points at once. The first point, all you men are hypocrites, and go sort out your own lives. And the second point he was making was about the law. The same person who spoke at the end of ancient Israel here spoke at the beginning in the Alpha history. So remember what we just read, that he instructed them through the prophet to have the woman caught in adultery to mix that water with the temple dust and drink it, determine whether or not she was guilty and what to do. So the same person who said, I don't condemn you, condemned them in the Alpha history. So here in the Omega, in this history here, Jesus is love. And in the ancient, or the beginning, he says poison her, and if she gets really sick, she's guilty. So the message of equality says that God never changes. Who was meant to change?
We were.
We were, humanity was meant to change. Jesus is essentially saying to them, didn't you know that you were meant to change? So he's talking to the Pharisees, if you were to say this. You were meant to change. It is no longer acceptable for you to act in the Omega history as you acted here in the Alpha history. And all we did was look at a case of abuse. We went back to our Alpha history and we said, in our history here, a case of abuse back here. And we went back to our Alpha history and we said that Ellen White's handling of the situation is not acceptable today. So the way she handled it here is not acceptable today. You see that?
The same within the Alpha. I mean, in the ancient.
Same over here.
Right.
Yes,
We are meant to change.
we are meant to change. They were meant to change. And that's why they didn't recognize him. They had not changed. I always thought of it as when people talk about the God of the Old Testament, how mean and he was a tyrant and all this other stuff, but when Jesus comes, Jesus says, don't you know when you've seen me, you've seen the Father? And if you've got that idea of the Old Testament, then there's a contradiction there. Because you've got this idea of this tyrant back here, and Jesus comes and he's all love here. To me, that means we should study to understand. So if you want, Christine, can you read?
Yeah. So Christina says, what I think that Jesus said was, if there is here anybody who did not commit adultery with this woman, let him stone her. He sat down and drew in the sand the names of all those who committed adultery with her. The Bible says that convicted in their heart, that those who were convicted in their heart, they left. What convicted them? The case in question was about the woman alone was a sinner, and Jesus showed them equality. So that they were saying, the people that were trying to stone her were saying that she was the guilty one, but Jesus was saying, I'm paraphrasing what Christina said. So, but Jesus is saying, well, all of you committed adultery with her, you're equally to sin. So there's equality there. It's not just the woman's fault.
Which, why she refers to it in here, since you hypocrites.
Yeah.
Sort your own lives. Go and sort out your own lives. You're a bunch of hypocrites.
Good point, Christina.
So what we need to understand now, and what they needed to understand then, what we need to understand is more fine print, fine understanding this change that has to occur to understand that. So are we saying that Ellen White is not inspired, was not inspired? Are we tearing up her writings?
No,
No. Do we blame her?
no, she was speaking according to her times.
Was Jesus tearing up the writings of Moses?
No,
No. Saying that Moses wasn't inspired. He says he came to complete the law, not to do away with it. The Pharisees see it as just tearing up the writings of Moses, whereas Adventism would also just see it as tearing up the writings of Ellen White. So they were waiting to question, they were waiting for him They are waiting for him to question the Sabbath, catching him every time they think he does. So he didn't come to question the Sabbath. He didn't come to tear up the law or the rules. What he's doing is very structured. All he's indicating is the progressive change that should have occurred in humanity among his people. So back in this history here, remember that they went into Egypt, right? And what did they see in Egypt?
Inequality.
Yeah. Just thinking more. Trying to think of how to. Yeah, well, I'll leave it at that, but yeah. Because where does the Apis bull trace back to?
Paganism.
Huh?
Or- I mean, that goes all the way back to the beginning, doesn't it?
Actually, Egypt. If we have time, we'll look at some of that, because I got a few things to look at if we have time.
There's two comments. Eva says, equality equals justice and mercy. And Susan says, fulfill means to fill it completely full. Therefore, it was still missing something until it was completed.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about the Declaration, the Constitution of the Declaration of Independence, the work of the United States. Well, that's really interesting because we know that we fill the cup of sin, right?
Yeah.
What were we supposed to fill it? What were we supposed to fill? Fill it to the full equality,
Right.
right?
Basically, we're filling up the cup of sin by not learning what we're supposed to be learning, by standing firm and just having babies instead of understanding that God is creative and that we everything's equal. So basically what I'm saying is that because we're choosing not to learn anymore, we're filling up that cup of inequality, that cup of sin, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, we're filling the cup. And what we were meant to do, beginning back in 1798, was to fulfill the law. Equality. To fulfill, bring it to its fulfillment.
Because when Adam and Eve were in Eden, they didn't know everything. Wasn't everything just supposed to be continually learning?
Yes,
And
yes. So she points out that in the writings of Moses, God couldn't actually say the following back in this history here. This is cruel and wrong, but I'm gonna let you hold on to some of your pagan ideas. So just know that I don't like it, but I'm gonna go ahead and tell you to do it. They wouldn't have understood. So he doesn't say it's wrong to give a pregnant woman accused of adultery this test, but elements of their paganism he allows to continue in a more controlled, careful, controlled fashion. Then, as in the United States, started with white male supremacy. Here, they're meant to transform. And as we're just talking here, fulfill the law of equality. I don't know if that's the right way to say it. Fulfill equality, or you're going to fill it with the cup, fill the cup of sin. So 2,000 years later, Jesus is just disappointed in them. He's not become nicer between these two histories. Jesus hasn't changed between the 2 points, but this is just one example of that line of progression. If he had come in the time of Moses, if Jesus had come in the time of Moses and done away with all those ideas completely, cut them off from their wrong models, what would have happened? So if Jesus came back here and cut them off from all those wrong models, what would have happened?
they would have been destroyed because they wouldn't have understood.
Yeah. So he tries to do that 2,000 years later here. How many of them understood?
Not even 12.
The majority of these people rejected. So imagine if you did it back here and you had the golden calf. If the vast majority of the couple, I think you had the golden calf, but the vast majority of the people couldn't get the point in the Omega history, they wouldn't have gotten the point in the Alpha history. Which is going back to that statement that she meant about many women have lost their faith over the point she was making. You've got the war in heaven, you've got 66 books in the Bible, you have the, all male oriented, written to male, by males, to males. Nothing really, nothing to lift up women, nothing putting on, nothing looking at the abuse or anything else that happens to women. None of that. And she made the point that many women lose their faith over this. So that story, about the woman caught in adultery, the two histories here, to have God instruct them of it. Can you see how that could affect women?
Yes, definitely.
So, anyway, so the same with here, as it was here, that they were meant to fulfill equality. And looking at Ellen White's writings, we're taking back to this history here, that God is the one that instructed them to do this. And Jesus is straightening out the principle, straightening out what they were supposed to get, that they were meant to progress. The same thing here, we're meant to progress. So when it comes to the issues of equality, we don't look at the writings of our prophet. We don't pick and choose what we like. Everything that we agree or disagree with is through careful studying, using methods and rules. And that's why, just like Jesus, we don't come in and question how we keep the Sabbath, because even when we look at something and say that cannot be what we follow today, it's because we followed a process and rules to come to that conclusion. And not my feelings or my opinion. We're making the changes that God always designed humanity to make, and our stiff-necked slowness is our fault, not his. And I think there might be something that I missed going through this. How did we come to, yeah, here it is. There's just one point in here that I skipped over and didn't mean to, about the women, back with the women, and many losing their faith. So what has changed? If many women have lost their faith through looking at things this way, the 66 books of the Bible written by men, to males, the 10 Commandments, all of that. What has changed here?
That we see it's not literal, it's symbolic, and that we understand gender.
How do we understand it? How do we come to understand it?
How do we come to understand it, or what do we understand now that
How did we come to understand gender? Terrible.
Back to Eden, the Eden to Eden model.
Susan's closer. Parables. What do we call that? What do we call it? How when we study? Huh?
methodology?
The methodology. Because through the methodology, and you're right too, Gloria, because line upon line, that's part of it. Through the methodology, you dismantle this prototype. So through the methodology, the prototype is dismantled. That brings us to understand equality correctly. That make sense?
Does to me and Susan.
So, and I do have a couple things. I have an Ellen White quote that I want to read in a minute. But I kind of updated this a little bit from earlier, just after your presentation, Christine, to just put in Eden, when God created, and I reversed it. God created, we did create man first. And then woman, right? And they were equal. They were the same. So what did Lucifer do?
He focused on the differences.
He focused on the differences. And what was the result? War in heaven. And he's cast out. And a third of the angels listened to Lucifer and looked at the differences instead of recognizing they were the same. So you have man and woman, and based on that male model, and all this history of men, and no talk of the oppression of women and the abuse of women, men and women look at each other, both different. They see the differences instead of seeing that they are the same. So by seeing the differences instead of the same, we see that sin comes in. Now we know that man has his foot on the neck of a woman, right? We talked about this the other night. If they were the same, then if a woman can cry, a man can cry. If a woman can laugh, a man can laugh. There's I might be being too basic, but they're the same. So they made this difference between feminine and masculine. The feminine was to be underneath the foot of the man. The woman is identified as the emotional, crying, expresses feelings, is sensitive. And a man is actually told, we went through this the other night, men are actually told, be a man, don't cry, don't be a sissy, deny your emotions. So what's the result of that? You've got this men rising to power, authority, control, abuse, patriarchy, or the apis bull. And the women are being oppressed, and controlled and abused to where we're at now, denied education and jobs. And then you have Eden restored, you should go back to there, gender equality, where women and men are equal and the same. So if we don't get rid of that male model of heaven, instead look at the differences between us instead of that we're the same, then wouldn't we end up like Lucifer?
So in that same thread, why else would Satan push his people to resist transgender and all of that so much? Because those people represent that non-gender of God, the true model of heaven, where God and the Son and Lucifer and the angels have no gender. Lucifer's pushing that gender to make us think badly of God, right? And so to have his people push back so hard on transgenders and everything, he's not allowing everyone to see the beauty of God and that non-gender model.
Really good point. The white Christian male
Exactly.
and transgender, binary, non-binary, all of that takes away the gender issues, which takes you closer to God.
Exactly. Right. Satan divides to conquer. He
So I
wants
have a quote that I want to read. If you want me to put it on the screen, you might. I want to put it on the screen. So give me a minute while I find it.
Susan said he wants rigid gender, not gender fluidity.
Elaine,
Yes,
I find it interesting, when we look at, we started out talking about, how things were, the differences that Lucifer saw between himself and Michael. And we know God allowed that for a purpose, and that was for Lucifer to be tested, or for the angels to be tested. And then I look at the entire, patriarchal system that was set up and how God was working with humanity. And then when God's word was being written, it was written by men, and it was written, everything so patriarchal. And so we attribute all that to God. And yet it's there for a test for us now at the end of time, because he allowed it that way. And I also look at in the William Miller's time, and you see that God, on the two charts, which are considered the Rock of Ages, he allowed a mistake on that chart. And what was that mistake allowed? To test the people. So I see, when we see some of these things happen, it's a test.
Definitely.
preparing for the final test.
Right.
All the little quizzes, as it was spelled, that said that earlier. All the little quizzes prepare us for the final. Teach a little, have a quiz, teach a little, have a quiz, leading up to the final. Okay, so let me. I was trying to look up that abuse quote. I don't know if it was last night, yesterday before I went to sleep, or this morning, but I was trying to look up that abuse quote. I think it was this morning. And this quote here had the word abuse in it, so it came up anyways. I happened to read this one. So I thought maybe we could take a few minutes to go through this. And before we do, let me look something else up here real quick. This one I won't share just because I already got this up here. But this was Apis, because we did talk about that just a minute ago. So in ancient Egyptian religion, Apis, or it says H-A-P-I-S, Apis. Let's see. Was a sacred bull worshipped in the Memphis region, identified as the son of Hathor, a primary deity in the pantheon of ancient Egypt. Initially, he was assigned a significant role in her worship, being sacrificed and reborn. Later, Apis also served as an intermediary between humans and other powerful deities. The Apis bull was an important sacred animal to the ancient Egyptians, as with the other sacred beasts. Apis' importance increased over the centuries. During colonization of the conquered Egypt, Greek and Roman authors had much to say about Apis, the markings of which the black calf was recognized, the manner of conception by a ray of heaven from heaven, his house at Memphis with a court for his deportment, the mode of prognostication from his actions, his death, the mourning at his death, his costly burial, and the rejoicings throughout the country when a new Apis was found. So Apis goes back to Egypt. But you do have male dominance come in prior to that. But Apis, because when Moses was up on the mountain and left Aaron down in charge, what were the children of Israel doing?
Making a statue of a bull.
Yeah, they were making the bull. And that's what they knew. They'd spent all those years in Egypt, and that's what they knew. They actually saw this bull as God. Um, but anyways, Apis represents that male patriarchy, the conquering spirit, strength, and courage. Okay, so this is Adventist Home, 115, paragraph 1. It's the heading given is God's instruction to Eve. Eve was told of the sorrow and pain that must henceforth be her portion. How would we word that today?
God would say, due to your actions, you are going to feel sorrow for what you have done.
Yeah, I was thinking Eve was told of the sorrow and pain that will henceforth be her portion. Must
Right.
kind of makes it sound like, okay, Eve, this is what you did. I'm God. And from now on, this is what you're going to deal with because that's what I'm placing upon you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So
So,
do we think
good.
that, so God probably told them what was going to happen because of their actions? Probably.
yeah, as a result of, this is the consequence, cause and effect.
Right.
That this happened, now this is going to happen because of it. Not because I'm a tyrant and want to punish you, but because there's going to be consequences that will come as a result of what you did.
Right.
And the Lord said, thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. So it's not saying that God is putting the man in charge to rule over you, but the results, this will be the result or the effect.
Right.
In creation, God had made her the equal of Adam. So God made her in creation the equal. Adam and Eve equal. They're the same. Right?
Right.
Had they remained obedient to God in harmony with his great law of love. So obedient to God, if I'm following that, is harmony with his great law of love. Is that correct?
Yeah.
What would that great law of love, what might that great law of love be?
Equality.
That's what I think. As I read through this a few times today, he made her equal, the equal of Adam. So had they remained obedient, if they remained in harmony with God's great law of love, what is that law of love? Actually think about it. What does it tell us in the New Testament about love? What is that law of love? What is it 1 John chapter 4? About loving, if you say you love God and you don't love your, and of course it's written by a male, don't love your brother, right? So this great law of love, isn't it treat people? I don't know if he goes so far as to say place the golden rule in there. I don't know, but loving humanity. What's the in the 10 Commandments? You have the first 6, which is your love toward God, right? And you have the 6 that are love to humanity, right? So isn't it about treating people with respect and kindness and all of that?
Yes.
So if they remained obedient, in other words, in harmony to his great law of love, if that's the 6 commandments, they would have ever been in harmony with each other. So in other words, they didn't remain in harmony with each other, right? Because they didn't remain in harmony with the great law of love. sin had brought discord. And now their union could be maintained and harmony preserved only by submission on the part of one or the other. So one becomes greater and the other has to submit, or one becomes the servant or slave and one becomes the master. Right?
Right.
So their union can only be maintained and harmony preserved by the submission on the part of one or the other. What does it mean on the part of one or the other? What goes through your mind when you hear that? The part of one or the other?
Like Susan said, that they would have had a power struggle.
I mean, hide
Well,
that.
couple of things went through my mind. And one of the things that went through my mind is that one or the other, I guess either the husband or the wife has to submit. Somebody has to submit to somebody.
Yes,
So I suppose just as easily, I mean, the prophecy has been already, the curse has already been foretold that Eve will be the Eve will be the, how did he put
the
it?
submissive.
Submissive, yes. But here it sounds like saying, well, it's either going to be one or the other. There's no more equality.
Right. That's what I got out of it. That it's going to
Yeah,
be, and the next sentence, that's why I hit it, just in case anybody was reading. That's why I hit it, because the next sentence was like, tip me off. Because it can be one or the other. It could be either one of you.
Right.
Okay. So Eve had been the first in transgression. So what does that mean? What if Adam was first?
That Adam would have been submissive to Eve, and either way, it would have been inequality.
So if they were the same, then this whole male-female thing didn't make any difference. They're the same. If Adam had sinned first in transgression, then it could have been him that had to be submissive to the male, that had to be submissive to the female.
Right.
So Eve had been the first in transgression. She'd fallen into temptation by separating from her companion. So I'm thinking that Adam could have been the first, and he could have fallen into temptation by separating from his companion, which was contrary to the divine direction. Then Eve, it was by her solicitation that Adam sinned. So she transgressed first, and by her solicitation, Adam sinned. And she was now placed in subjection to her husband. Had the principles enjoined in the law of God been cherished by the fallen race, this sentence, though growing out of the results of sin, would have proved a blessing to them. I'm not quite sure that I have that figured out. But had the principles enjoined in the law of God, and I think when we're talking about the great law of love, we might be talking about the 6 commandments, and maybe more broad than that. But had the principles enjoined in the law of God been cherished by the fallen race, this sentence, though it grew out of the results of sin, would have proved a blessing to them. But so if they could have, even though we've fallen into sin, one had to be in submission to the other now. It still could have been, if you still followed the principles in the law of God, it would have been a blessing. But what does it say?
Man's abuse of the supremacy thus given him has too often rendered the lot of woman very bitter and made her life a burden. So I would say men took advantage of the situation.
They abused the supremacy that they were given.
Yes, because she clearly states here that had they had Adam practiced equality, they would still have received the blessing. But no, that wasn't the case. We as men abused the supremacy. We took advantage of the situation, and because it was possible to do that, we did it.
Yeah.
I like to use the word dominion, as we talked about. Where the dominion comes in is that's control over. And how does that look when wives submit to the dominion?
Say that again. Sorry. Jackie,
How does it look to for the woman to submit to the dominion over her of the husband?
if I understand correctly, she was going to now be, he is given this supremacy, but he wasn't to abuse it. And he abused it, which made the lot of woman bitter and her life a burden. I don't know if I'm able to follow your question. I feel like I have too many thoughts going through my head.
Yeah, I do too, because, my thought last night was, or it might have been Wednesday night, was on submission. And all the result of submitting to an authoritarian alcoholic husband brought a lot of grief and a lot of sadness and a lot of pain. So I said that out of my own experience that I went through by submission, by my understanding of submission.
So if, with that as an example, I don't know that I have the answers, but with that as an example, because according to this, man was given the supremacy as a result. I don't know if it means given by God or it's the result that he's going to rule over you. As a result, he's going to now rule over you because of this. But man abused it. And in the case of your situation, I think is an example of that abuse, right?
Yes,
It's an example of that abuse. Whereas if they enjoined the principles of the law of God of equality, right? This love,
Yes.
this respect, this equality, then to just have men be the head of the household, you'd still work together. I don't know if I'm going to say this right, because I don't have clear prophetic understanding myself, you know what I mean?
yeah,
But you could still have and practice equality with the man being the one that goes to work, or however it's going to look, however it looks like. But instead, what man did was abuse that supremacy.
the abuse of the man of his power, if you want to say it in that way, or his responsibility, made the life of the woman or his wife very bitter, as Sister White says here, or Ellen White says here. Was too often rendered the lot of women very bitter and made her life a burden.
Yeah.
I
And so-
agree with what you're saying, because if you look at what it says here, it says that had the principles enjoined in the law of God been cherished by the fallen race, this sentence, the sentence was already given, though growing out of the results of sin would have proved a blessing to them, because they could have still practiced, as Elaine is saying, could have been practicing equality with each other and just recognizing that, if there was going to be some difference or something that they didn't agree on for whatever reason, that somebody had to have the upper hand, but I don't even know if I'm saying it right. It's just, but to see that if they treated each other with equality, even though there was this inequality built into it now, or the supremacy, I just see that obviously, as we're talking about, the abuse has been so god awful that you can't even stomach it.
So what if we do this the way the methodology teaches, you compare and contrast, right? So the sentence is that he's going to rule over you. That's the sentence. And had the principles enjoined in the law of God been cherished by the fallen race, this sentence that he's going to rule over you, this supremacy, even though it grew out of the results of sin, this supremacy that he's going to rule over you, would have proved a blessing. So him ruling over you could have proved a blessing.
Yes, I see that.
But man's abuse of that supremacy. So if man's abuse made woman's life miserable, then what would it have been had the principles of law in the law of God been cherished? Now you have them married, and he's going to rule over you, but not abuse that power. He's going to still love and cherish and respect you
as he's been instructed to.
as he's been instructed to.
Wives don't just submit. The husbands are supposed to also love the wives as Christ loved the
Right.
church.
That's right.
I was taught that if the husband does not love you as he's been instructed, then we also don't have to submit.
Well,
We don't
exactly.
submit to an abusive husband. We submit to a husband who loves us, but still, then again, submitting, I don't like that idea anyway, because that's not equality. But it's not just one-sided.
No.
Husbands have their instructions too, don't they? To love.
Well, yeah, I mean, right here it says, had the principles enjoined in the law of God been cherished, and we were talking about this, had they remained obedient, which they didn't, they didn't remain obedient. They did not remain in harmony with his great law of love. Had the principles enjoined in the law of God, and I think it's talking about this great law of love, or the 6 commandments, how you treat people, how you treat one another, had those principles been cherished by them, then the sentence that he shall rule over thee actually could have proved to be a blessing. So, but instead of receiving a blessing from it, man abused that supremacy, which made it miserable for women.
Exactly. And that's what we see all over the place. That's why, we have to understand equality, what this really means, and where the responsibilities lie with each person.
And some take it very far, the abuse of their supremacy, very far.
Yes, exactly.
I have a thought.
Yes.
And so I want to, I've been trying to figure this out, and I'm not even sure if I'm in the right place. So correct me if I'm going in the wrong direction. But the thought is this: it said, but sin had brought discord, and now their union could be maintained and harmony preserved only by submission on the part of one or the other. And when I saw that only by submission. The first thing that actually, I gave an answer earlier about it could have either been Adam or Eve that could have sinned first. But my actual first thought that came to my mind was Christ.
Yeah.
That was the first thing that came, but I didn't know how to express it, so I didn't bring it up. But preserved only by submission on the part of one or the other. And when Christ came, I know he came to set everything straight. But he came as a slave of slaves, right? I mean, servant of servants, which is a slave, right? So in a sense, he came as a woman. Because isn't that what we're talking about right now? Women as in slavery?
Yes.
Yes.
So like I said, something about triggered here that brought my mind to Christ. And I don't know where to go with it. But just when he came as slave and we say that women are slaves, I mean, that's how we treat them. And he that's basically, what he came. He came not to overthrow the Romans, but to be killed by the Romans. And so they couldn't understand that because they had the apis bull mentality, but he didn't come as a king of kings. He came as a slave, as in the parable, as a woman. But I haven't developed that thought. I don't know where to take it, but that's what I'm seeing. But even with that, if you cherish the principle, enjoy the law of God, and cherish by the fallen race in this sentence through going out of results of sin, still would be a blessing. So yes, we need to understand what equality, what that really looks like, because Christ had to come as a slave or a woman, but we know it's genderless, but I mean, that quality as a slave to set things straight. And he led himself, that's not even the right word. Christ led to be abused as he was a woman, as if Christ was a woman, because that's, again, the man's abuse of supremacy. Christ was abused as women gets abused.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe we can look at this another time too. Because I'm sure there's more in there than I'm seeing.
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of things that as God is leading us, showing us and pricking our conscience and showing us things in a different way so that we can understand. And so, we started this with how Lucifer magnified himself. And the difference there was while Lucifer was magnifying himself, there was no defense for Christ. He didn't have to defend himself. He didn't defend himself while he was here on earth. He didn't defend himself while he was in heaven when Lucifer was puffing himself up. I don't know what else to use. I'm just saying him. I know that's incorrect. I don't want to say her but I don't know what else to use for right now. But Christ did not defend the accusations that that Lucifer was better. He's higher, mightier, prettier, brighter, more intellectual, and Christ remained humble throughout the whole, whether in heaven or whether on earth, he remained humble. And perhaps that's a quality of the feminine side. The humility, being humble.
But when you say the feminine side, you can see God demonstrating, and maybe that's what you're saying. You can see God demonstrating the feminine side as well as the masculine side.
Right. But what I guess what I'm trying to say is we tend to apis bull everything, right? Hyper masculinize what men are supposed to be. And so that balance of masculine feminine is lost. So that's why I'm saying, men see, if we're humble, that's to men, that's weakness. We got to conquer. And that's weakness. And so that's why I'm thinking, to be effeminate, right? Humble. That's the other side of the quality, the feminine quality. That's you're supposed to have a balance with. And because we have it out of whack, we can't see that. And we oppress feminine gender and anything that has to do with femininity, because that's God's character. We said before that God's character is humble. Well, Lucifer was, there's no humility in him. And that's what we as men on this earth has embraced, not humility.
So what you're saying then, and I think Susan put it in there too, is that the humility aspect is a feminine trait.
That's so far, that's the way I see it. Jesus was humble.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So if the two of them, the fallen race, the two of them, had the principles enjoined in the law of God been cherished by the fallen race, so wouldn't there have been a humility in both of them? While one is submitting to the other, one's going to rule over the other, wouldn't there have been humility in both of them for this to have been a blessing?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Exactly. And that's the point. That would have been a blessing. In equality, there is humility on both sides. But when that is taken out of the equation and you have the apis bull mentality, humility, it takes humility to submit. And who's to submit? Christ submitted out of humility. Women submit. So that's why I say it's out of balance. And the hyper masculinization of the apis bull, we either ignore or forget or don't want to think about as men being humble, because that's weakness. That's being a woman. That's being a sissy.
So, go ahead, somebody else, you were gonna say something.
I'll say something else. Something else. I mean, may I say something? I think that Hal is talking about cultural feminism, not a radical feminism. Because a radical feminist is not gonna submit. It's, in other words, I believe it's not gonna compromise.
Right. That's why we need to be radical feminists.
You
Sure.
know, since I've been following, I'm trying to understand the center of the discussion. See, right now, at every level, at every relationship, I see one aspect of dominionism, whether there's a couple of lesbians or homosexuals. There is one that plays the role of a woman and the other that plays the role of a man. So this is not a male-female stuff, you know?
Manuel, are you saying that as if that's the way it always is? Because that's not true.
Yeah, it's not like that.
What is not true?
When in a male-male or female-female relationship, does not have to be that division. They can both just be equal and treat each other with equality. It doesn't have to be where one has to be the male representative and one has to be the female. It doesn't work that way.
Well, it's been, so there is no struggle among them then, because I've seen this, it's my personal observation. I'm not generalizing, of course, but most of the time, that's what I've seen, that one is on top of the other. I mean, it's like, you know, we have to admit or understand that Lucifer brought to this world, no, he brought inequality or false freedom. See, and God sent his son to show us true equality and true freedom. So, but throughout the ages, in Greek and Rome, there was this role of a man, even among men, being one being subdued and the other, one being the oppressor and the other being the oppressed. And so it's been with men and women and in a relationship. As Fel said yesterday, it is ingrained in us, it is in our DNA. But that was exclusively talking about male-female relationship.
I agree that not all homosexual relationships are equal, but not all of them are unequal either.
And just to point out what several of you are saying, if this helps, what several of you are saying in the chat, and correct, make sure I say this right. So we have up here Eden, the Eden model is woman and man, but you have an LGBTQ, you have a homosexual couple who say this is two women, right?
Right.
But sin comes in. If I'm understanding what several of you are putting in the chat, sin comes in. So even though it's two women, you're still going to have one that's going to be abusing this. I don't know if abusing is right. One that's going to be acting one role and one that's going to be acting the other role, but it's still based on the model of sin.
Right.
Rather than equality. Did I say that to those of you that are commenting? What?
The ape is bull.
Yeah. So you might have a homosexual couple. If it's two men or two women, you might have that couple that is still got the Apis bull model. That one is going to be the dominant, and one's going to be the submissive. And you're still going to have this out of balance. Because they're operating off the model of sin, not the model of equality.
Right. That would be the norm, I would say. Culturally, that would be the norm. However, also as Ellen White said, those who choose to practice equality would receive blessings. So the model of sin, I would say that's probably like maybe the dominant force in the world, but there are those who choose to practice equality.
And that's in both male, male, female, female, and male, female relationships.
Correct.
So if you're not practicing equality, then if I can say this boldly, you're practicing abuse.
Yeah.
Because when
Correct.
there's a submission of one to the other, it's a form of abuse. It really is. And that's what Elder Parmenter and Elder Tess have been talking about when you look at, as was brought up, you know, how things were in Greek and Roman times and all this stuff, and all the what they consider homosexual relationships. They weren't with equality. They were with one being submissive over the other, which means that there's abuse there. We just have to call it for what it is. It's abuse. If you don't have equality, you're practicing abuse at one level.
Right, right.
Was an interesting quote. Maybe we can look at it some more later.
So yeah, thank you, Manuel, for bringing that point up.
I hope that helped explain it. Yeah, and who was it? Oh, Sarah put it in there. That was good during the time of Ellen White, but not for us today. Ellen White did not understand gender equality. So Manuel, did that help?
Did that help you?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
It helps. Well, I want to also say that the Protestantism, evangelicals in particular, I saw an interview of Oprah to this mega church leader. His name is Austin. He's from Texas. He's from Texas. He's a relatively young guy. He has a church that gathers about 60,000 people. And Oprah asked him, how could that be possible that you in your congregation don't have a homosexual or lesbian? The conclusion of the interview was that, do you believe that there's gonna be homosexuals in heaven? And he said, yes, I believe so. Now, the position of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and as far as homosexuals and lesbians is concerned, about all the LGBTQ plus society, is that it's an aberration, right? So now these people is changing little by little. I don't know to what point. I don't know the sincerity. I cannot characterize their intentions. Anyway, the point is that the Seventh-day Adventist people is falling behind. And look, Fox News the other day, I was looking at an interview of this. His name is one of the most
Tucker.
aggressive, Tucker. He was interviewing a lesbian person, and he was asking questions about like if she belongs to them. She belongs to that LGBTQ, but also to the Fox community. He was asking the question about transgenderism. See, because transgender is the group that is going to be the most affected group of all, the most hated ones. So he was asking the question if about including transgender in the LGBT, and they say, okay, LG is biological, T is not, but I mean, transgender is not biological. We know that it's biological because that's what the prophet says, you know. And the thing is that they're excluding the transgender group, nonetheless, we know that even if you are just lesbian or homosexual, you are also targeted by these people. They're going to be persecuted as well. But there is a group that is self-deceived. They think that they are being accepted when in reality they are not. And so the reason I bring this point of view, I know that we're talking about inequality, but this is inequality between the LGBTQ people.
Yes, but it would be still based on the wrong model. If I followed you correctly. If they're practicing inequality, they're still working off the wrong model. So, anybody else before we close in prayer? Okay, I'll go ahead and read her prayer. Dear God in heaven, we see your people. We are always stiff-necked, always slow to learn. We see your goodness in not giving up on us. I pray that we will meditate on the things taught today. We will see externally how much damage is done when people hold to a wrong idea of history, and so many have a wrong idea of the history of heaven. May we make the concerted effort to rid ourselves of incorrect models, of our limited ideas of creation. May we try to represent you in your beauty and in your love, especially in the way that we treat each other. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.